You know how many Nicktoons never saw the light of day? Too many to count. Throughout the channel's history, plenty of promising ideas for cartoons have been presented to Nickelodeon, but were passed on for one reason or another. Many times, these shows were then pitched to rival channels and picked up to enormous success. Like, The Proud Family was announced as a Nicktoon in the same press release as SpongeBob and Jimmy Neutron, but wound up on Disney Channel 3 years later. There are a few cases where the opposite happens, a rival channel passes on an idea and Nick scoops it up, but here's a case where they did that, but didn't even make it into a series. Today we're talking about Mina and the Count. How could you pass up Mark Hamill voicing a vampire? Well, there are acceptable reasons, but I'll save those for near the end. I just want to bask in one of the more popular segments of the 90s cartoon anthology series, Cartoon Network's What a Cartoon and Nickelodeon's Oh Yeah cartoons. A lot of famous animated series have come out of these anthologies, many of which I've covered on this channel already, but I've always struggled to add them to my bucket list. How do I do all these segments by all these different minds justice? It's the same reason I've put off Kablam for a while. I fear I'll be glossing over something. But I figured Mina and the Count's history and the background behind its cancellation is interesting enough to be its own retrospective. So who created it in the first place and why? Rob Renzetti initially created Mina and the Count for Cartoon Network as a single short for their showcase of new industry talent, Fred Seibert's What a Cartoon Show. Clearly inspired by the mythos of Count Dracula, Rob's short premiered on November 5th, 1995, but since a lot of cartoons were already well underway for full production, Mina and the Count got lost in the shuffle and wasn't even given a follow-up. But 3 years later, Fred Seibert had started working with Nickelodeon on another similar showcase, Oh Yeah cartoons. Rob was given 6 slots in the showcase's second season, airing from September to December 1999, which was the same number of slots allocated to the show's 2 other most promising segments, Bill Burnett and Larry Huber's Chalk Zone, and Butch Hartman's The Fairly Odd Parents. So things were finally going Girl and Ghoul's way. Until Fred asked Rob to do a different concept for the 6th slot, meaning they ended up only getting 5 segments, but 6 overall if you count the What a Cartoon short. With that few episodes, you'd think there'd be no time to leave an impact, but you'd be wrong.
Your parents must be so proud of such a beautiful, adorable, darling, sweet, precious, aggravating child.
Every night, Vlad the vampire leaves his castle and feasts upon the blood of unsuspecting teenagers in a nearby city. But eventually, his assistant Igor mixes up the addresses, and he mistakenly enters the room of a 7-year-old girl, Mina. She wakes up and plays with him, caring little about his threatening nature, and before you know it, they're secret best friends. Vlad, despite being a gothic horror icon, is a fairly easygoing everyman, seeking friendship, as unfitting as his choice of friend may be. He can still pull off the stereotypical vampire tropes pretty well. Mina is the heart of the series, gradually opening up and finding more fun in the supernatural. She's got the same shtick as a lot of kids in Oh Yeah cartoons, being a bit awkward at school, but finding recluse in their fantastical world. Igor is Vlad's assistant, and quite the sourpuss, not being very fond of the new dynamic created. I'll admit he's useful in some sense, as Vlad and Mina on their own would probably be too sugary for a main lineup. And I love how they're all entirely coloured in different primary colours. It makes it more fun when they all show up on screen at once. The series didn't run long enough to feature a star-studded cast of side characters, but there are a few that could have gotten follow-up episodes. There's Vlad's posse of other Hammer horror icons, who probably would have been given more elaborate quirks over time, and Mina's family. There's a father smoking a pipe so you know this was made in the 20th century, and a college-aged sister with a crush on Vlad. And lastly, a small array of school bullies and a standard elementary school teacher. Look, there's only 6 episodes, I can't be too disappointed with this. Plus, the animation is pretty cool. It's ironic how the original Cartoon Network pilot has a more unique and experimental look, while the Nickelodeon shorts appear more Cartoon Network-esque. Like, Vlad would not look out of place on the Powerpuff Girls. The way it uses shape sticks on its own, it's got a very angular look, fitting the horror theme. And as I said before, the colours were given a lot of thought. With a world as geometrically inclined as this, the characters and objects really needed that vibrant pop. And this show delivers the pop. And since the episode count is so short, here's a quick rundown through all of them from worst to best. The Ghosts Tribunal isn't bad, but it introduces rules to the horror side of the universe that aren't given as much depth or thought as you'd want. I just think of this one as the courtroom episode, not the one that establishes major lore elements. The pilot, Interlude with a Vampire, does a fine enough job of introducing the concept, but feels a bit plain compared to the Oh Yeah Cartoons shorts. I'll give it points for the really cute ending though. Playing a hunch is a basic good time, Vlad trying to hide Mina from Igor, and Mina just messing around in his castle. But again, it's quite basic. Frankenfrog is one of the more involved stories, with Mina using Vlad's magic to create a zombie frog that causes a bit of havoc at her school. It's as entertaining as it sounds. The vampire who came to dinner did the best job at setting up a new aspect of the world, Mina's family life, and giving Vlad a ridiculously awkward dinner experience while it's at it. But my favorite episode would be My Best Friend, an excellently produced little short where Mina gets revenge on some kids for taunting her supposedly made-up friend. It really seemed like they were getting along well by this point, but a pretty serious problem with the show drove them apart and caused their segment to be cancelled. Before the 6th episode was boarded out, Fred Seibert told Rob Renzetti that there was some concerns with the segment's premise on an executive level, that they were no longer comfortable with the idea of a little kid hanging out with an unrelated adult. So Rob was forced to think of a wholly original concept for his last Oh Yeah episode, and came up with My Neighbor Was a Teenage Robot, which was successfully picked up and became My Life as a Teenage Robot 4 years later. So for that reason alone, I can see the silver lining to Mina and the Count's axing. I just prefer Teenage Robot that much. Plus, while the reason it was axed sounds like a reach on paper, since there's nothing inappropriate in the show and it's clearly a work of fantasy, you don't want little kids to start hanging out with weird grown-ups because they saw Mina do it. Nickelodeon's output has the goal of entertaining kids, but also, like all kids media, the responsibility to give them good advice that won't ruin their lives. You can still enjoy Mina and the Count and respect the love and effort put into it while keeping that in mind, because I sure do. If you wanted more out of this sort of setup, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy eventually came along to fill that kids hanging out with horror icon void, so you could have that to fall back on if that's the aspect that appealed to you. And if you have the ultra-specific itch for a Cartoon Network pilot based on vampires, Tig and C creator Levon Jahanian has submitted a pilot for the Modern Cartoons project Dang It's Dracula. Whenever these are unveiled, I hope it's given a show so I can have something else like this to review in 20 years. So there you go, I kinda did a review of Oh Yeah Cartoons. I'm still unsure how to cover these sorts of anthology shows. There's at least 6 that tickle my fancy, but I'm torn between covering the segments individually or covering the full series. I really want to give each of these shorts and their creators some attention, because if it got on TV and people liked it, then I don't think it's a complete failure.
See you next week for God Night.
See you there, Vlad. Oh, and bring your little werewolf friend.